Welcome to another segment of California CEO's Nonprofit Showcase, sponsored by the Arc of Riverside County. I'm Robbie Silver, Director of Communications of the Arc, and this is one in a series of videos to introduce you to special friends and advocates who have worked with our agency over the last 2 decades to improve the lives of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Tony Anderson, the Executive Director of the Arc of California, an advocacy organization based in Sacramento. Tony has been directing advocacy efforts of the Arc of California for 12 years, and during that time he has been the primary spokesperson for this disability group and their families. He is highly respected for his vast knowledge and ability to help policymakers understand the diversity needs of some of California's most vulnerable citizens. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you.
So to kind of get us started, can you tell us a little bit about the relationship with Arc of California and its relationship with local chapters like us throughout the state?
Oh, sure. The Arc is the state chapter of a national organization called the Arc of the United States. So we're the Arc of California, and our local chapters are county-based. So we have the Arc of Riverside here. Right. We have Santa Barbara. We have 22 local chapters.
Tell us about these vulnerable citizens that you advocate for.
Sure. There are people with developmental disabilities, and developmental disabilities is a whole range of different kinds. People are familiar with autism and Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, intellectual disability, and that is the old term for that was mental retardation. There's a term that we don't use anymore because it's become pejorative, and politically we don't, and it's not even a diagnosis name today. So intellectual disability is the phrase that we use. That's the diagnosis. So those are the folks, and then a whole range of other kinds of similar disabilities: fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, brain injury, where there's an intellectual disability that comes from that. So those are just a few of the examples of the many different disabilities that are developmental.
And with all that being said, tell us about some of your responsibilities as Executive Director of the Arc of California.
Sure. I'm a principal lobbyist for the association, but really I'm the advocate. So my biggest job is to hear from our community, hear what's happening in the lives of people with developmental disabilities and their families. And we are a family-run organization, but our membership includes families, people with developmental disabilities, and community people. So my job really is to hear what's happening and then to try to impact policy to change things for the better. And that's that's the first level. But really the deeper level of what I do is I help people figure out how they can express themselves with policymakers. So a lot of people are worried about calling their legislator, their member of Congress, the senators, the state senators, the assembly member. They don't know them and they get nervous about it. So part of my job is to let them know that those are just people too. They work for you, and find ways to calm them down and then to express what's happening in their lives to their legislators. And then the big part of the job is to get a lot of them to talk about what's happening in their lives and then to make the policy changes. So that's the main thing that we do, is help people express themselves. And then on another level, a little on the professional side, I'm a lobbyist, so we also go in and try to convince policymakers to do things that will help people with developmental disabilities. Now, we're a nonprofit, so we don't use money, we don't have a PAC or anything like that. So we do have a compelling story. The lives of people with disabilities, their families, the things that people go through so that people with disabilities can access their community. It's actually a very compelling story, and they struggle, they go through there's barriers in life that they have to overcome. So we help them, right? And that's something that legislators are interested in. They want to help their constituencies. So without using money, we bring masses of people together, and with the amount of people we have, that's where our power comes from. So it's a little different than what most people think of when they think of a lobbyist. But when we tell them we'll bring the people, we can bring the people, because people will come out and talk about what's important to them and fight for for their rights and for their civil rights and for access to their communities where they many times don't have any access at all.
I'm really glad that you touched on the community focus of this organization, and from a legislative perspective, it helps, or it's a great idea when you bring out people and their passion. But tell me about some of the major issues that are facing those with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities today.
Well, we've really been struggling through pretty much about 15 years worth of neglect and major divestment in the California system from community services that support people with developmental disabilities. And we've been fighting that issue for quite some time now. We've been in a campaign for 2 years, and just a matter of weeks ago, we had a very huge victory where there was a major investment made back into this community. We lost during that period of time well over $1 billion of investment the state used to make. So you're not going to get it all back in one fell swoop, but we have a very large commitment from the state to say, okay, we will set aside, we'll put it permanently in the budget, and we will help people with developmental disabilities in ways so that they can get jobs, so that they can live at home with their families, so they can live in their own places. So the community providers that are out there, these are all local community providers. Most of them are nonprofit organizations. All of our chapters are nonprofit organizations, and they struggle to make ends meet. And they usually have to appeal to their communities to get additional money to make up for the commitment that the state used to make but doesn't anymore. So this has been their struggle. They've made up that hole for quite some time. They can't do that anymore, and many of them now are going out of business. So we told that story. People with disabilities told that story. Their families told that story. And the community providers came forward and said, we're not used to talking about our own needs, because we're talking about the needs of people with disabilities and how we'll help. But we're really struggling ourselves, and we don't think we're going to be able to survive. And many of them have been going out of business. We had about 450 group homes. These are homes where people with disabilities live together in a group, and we'd lost 450 of those homes. And then we were seeing these larger programs that help people in the daytime get some skills to work so that they can get their own jobs. And we saw those kinds of programs going out of business as well. And then we had children's services, and they were going out of business. So we had all kinds of programs that were out there going out of business, and we had them coming forward and telling their story to their policymakers as well. So with all of that, it did make a significant impact on the hearts and minds of our policymakers in California, and there was a big effort to come forward to stop that trend of collapse and to begin to move forward. So.
And I know budgetary issues have been just a major concern for many organizations throughout the state, and especially since it hits so close to home for the Arc of California. And I know you touched a little bit on a general basis of those budgetary concerns, but what sort of major issues do you see, especially from a legislative focus moving forward?
Well, there are all kinds of new changes in the rules, right, for how do you employ people. So we have community nonprofits who now will have to pay more money in the minimum wage, right? So we have been wanting to pay our workers more money, but the money hasn't been there. So now the rules are changing. The minimum wage will increase, and which is a great thing. But if the state doesn't come forward to pay for that, then that would be an automatic shutdown of these programs, because they don't get to raise their cost of their product that they produce. They're stuck in a state rate. They work together with the state. Whatever the rate is, it's over. You can't increase it. So when the state changes the rules on you and increases your expenses, there's nothing you can do. You have to hope that the state will increase their rate. And many times they do, to cover most of the services or most of the new increases. That's a big worry, a big concern of our community, because they like I said, they cannot raise their rates to cover those new costs. So they're worried there. There's some details in how do you pay for the staff that the state has not been coming forward to help out, and so they have been losing quite a bit of money each time the minimum wage does increase. So there are changes there. There are changes in the way you do overtime now that are really impacting quite a few of these local community providers. And a lot of people don't know what those things are. And they're usually very good things that are happening. You want to pay for sick time. Everybody wants to cover that, and we really wanted that because we want to be able to cover and take care of the direct support professionals who are the backbone of this community system. So when those changes occur, they're very exciting and very positive. They just are very concerning if they're not funded. That's something that we have to spend a lot of time on and push back on and get the assurances from the policymakers that they'll pay for it. So, and we spend quite a bit of time doing that. So we're not a traditional trade type of association. We're not a trade lobbyist, but the community services are very important, and it turns out that the trade that they provide is critically important for the civil rights of people with disabilities. So we work on those issues very hard, and we really want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to support a whole community, a strong community of community providers.
That's great info, Tony. And this is such an emotional issue that really everybody can get behind in human services. But what can self-advocates and community leaders and business leaders can do to basically help people with intellectual and developmental disabilities reach their full potential?
Well, first of all, self-advocates, people with disabilities who are receiving the supports, it's all about them. So when we ask them, how's your life? We need them to be honest about it, what their real dreams are, what they really want in life. And then when things aren't going the way they're supposed to not just take it. What we have is a whole population who's been sort of trained young in life to agree and to not cause too many problems, right? So it's easy to convince people with developmental disabilities, in many cases, not all cases, but it's easy to convince them to agree. And we need people to teach their young people with developmental disabilities to say no at certain times and to speak up for themselves and to begin young to do that so that as they grow older, they can self-determine what they do with their life. And it's critically important. They're abused at a much higher rate than anybody else in society, right? Sometimes 10 times more than other groups. And it happens because they're easy to convince or coerce, and we want them to stand up for their rights. And then when there comes to community systems that are in place to support them, once there's this major divestment, which happens all the time in our system, once it begins to happen, they need to be able to be the ones who say, no, you can't do this. You can't pick on this group in our society and take away from their ability to participate in the community. So the biggest thing we need from the self-advocates is we need everybody to help them learn to speak up for themselves and to establish those relationships with their policymakers, with their local city council policymakers, supervisors, and all the way up through state and national politics. Because there's a system in place, there's a commitment that society has made to support people with developmental disabilities, but it can go away. And if they don't fight for it, if they don't express what's happening to it, then it will easily begin to erode. And then we need the same from their families, because the other part is that the system is built for their families so that they can do everything they can while they're growing up to maintain their sons and daughters at home. And it can be stressful in some situations. Some of these disabilities, there are some behavioral challenges that people have. They might act up. There may be a real challenge in caring for somebody. There might be some very serious health needs that require a lot of physical attention and can be very emotional. So if we don't do enough as a system and as a society to maintain these families, then people will not be able to stay at home at an early age, and they will have to go into group homes, or they used to go into state institutions. We used to remove them from their families, but we also used to remove them from society. And we have made a commitment not to do that anymore and to support those families. But when times get tough, we start to cut back and we divest from these community systems, forgetting that when we maintain them, that it saved us quite a bit of money, because those institutions and the other services can be very costly. So maintaining people at home, making sure that people with disabilities speak up for themselves and access the community the way they want to is critically important.
And you've just been a tremendous advocate and partner, over the last decade on battling many of these issues. If you can expand on how have you collaborated with the Arc of Riverside County, over your tenure with the Arc of California, and what kind of issues have you collaborated with, and really got in the trenches?
Sure. The Arc of Riverside County is actually one of those example chapters, an example local chapter. This is the kind of chapter we want throughout the country, because the Arc is family run, right? So you have to have at least half of your board has to be family members, and families have to be very involved, but it also has to be centered on the self-advocate as well and their needs. But the Arc of Riverside does the things provides quality services to meet the needs, but then does the extra. And that's really the example that we're looking for the local chapter. They connect with their local policymakers, they connect with their state legislators, and also in Congress. And when you're doing all of that, you have a commitment. As a nonprofit, you sort of have this deal, right, with society that, okay, we're going to not charge you taxes on part of your income, right, and on your income, but in exchange, you have to provide an important quality service to your community. And the Arc of Riverside County takes that serious. And that's what we want to see. We want to see chapters who say, we are in partnership, we are serving our local community in a variety of different ways. The playground piece is critically important, linking young families with disabilities and without disabilities, helping bridge that gap early on so the prejudice that they experience later doesn't occur. So you build those relationships early in life, and then the work that they do in criminal justice, assuring that people with developmental disabilities receive justice in society. So if they've committed a crime themselves, we have a problem. Sometimes they will end up in prison or in jail a lot longer than anybody else, because they're going to admit to committing crimes. Maybe they didn't do it, but they're getting coerced there. And so the Arc of Riverside County has made sure that there's been justice on that side, and then justice in the area of people who have developmental disabilities who have been victimized. There's a lot of times where the criminal justice system doesn't follow up because they consider maybe they're not a good witness. Maybe people won't believe them because they have a developmental disability. And so they don't follow along, and they don't charge the perpetrators. So the Arc of Riverside County has been in the forefront of making sure that justice is served for the victims who have developmental disabilities. And then the last big thing that they've done here for us too at the state level, because these big initiatives, they actually push us on the state level to either push policy, write legislation, and get it passed to address the issues that they have brought up from their local level, from their observations of the people that they serve. So in the area of Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorders, FASD, they have done tremendous work. And not only the prevention and the awareness of what happens during pregnancy if you're drinking, but also the need for community services as well, for the families and for people who have FASD. So they have been tremendous in that area, and has caused the Arc of California to do a lot of regulatory work and make the changes that they have said that needed to be made. And then also there's different legislation that we brought forward because of what they have said that we need. And then they've caused me to work even harder, studying the issues even further, and bringing in local groups from all over the state to address the issues that really have been brought forth by the Arc of Riverside County.
So Tony, what are some misconceptions that the public or even local legislators might have about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Well, if you look at from the very beginning, people think that little children should be educated separately. The people with intellectual disabilities, children with intellectual disabilities, they need to be educated by themselves, separated away from the rest of the students so that they can focus only on some skill base that they have. Now, there might be times for that, but really, children are children. There's so many things that you learn as a child when you're together with other children of different races, different abilities, different backgrounds. And that's a misconception still today, that people think that you should be educated separately from others. And the same thing happens all throughout school. So it's a critical need for us to learn to work together with one another throughout the school years. And then the other piece of that is that also then helps us in society down the road. If you never have any experiences at all with a person with an intellectual and developmental disability, then you're going to grow up either thinking that they might be odd, or that you need to be protected from them, or that there's something wrong. And in fact, they're just people. They're people with different abilities, different interests, but when we all grow up together like that, it makes a big difference. And so that's one misconception that still is around today. We didn't educate children with developmental disabilities until 1974. So that's not that long ago. And we're still coming around on that issue, but we've made great strides and we need to continue to do that. The other is people often think that people with developmental disabilities need to be separated for their own safety. And it is true that people with developmental disabilities are victimized at a much higher rate. But if they're separated from society, the same thing continues to happen, right? You can't develop friendships with people without disabilities, and that's really what makes you connected to your society, to community, is you make friends and people know you. And not just really close friends, but also that person at the grocery store or the coffee shop, and your casual friends that everybody else has. So making sure that people with developmental disabilities are part of society in every part of the fabric is critically important. And they don't need to be pushed to the side for their own safety. And then the other is, many people think that because of a disability, they won't be able to work. And they do receive benefits because they have a disability. But if they are working and they're learning and they're in a work training program, or they go to college and they're learning the skills, they can learn how to work. And many people with developmental disabilities can learn to do part of the job if they have a lot of disabilities, or maybe they just need some social training and they can do a lot. So they can do a variety of different things, and they can contribute vastly to the bottom line of a local business. But there's this perception that people with disabilities won't be able to do that, and they won't be able to communicate or do the things that they need to do to help a business make money. And that's just not true. We can show many, many examples of people with disabilities learning the parts of their jobs that they get really good at and become superstars in their work. So those are three areas that I think of that people with disabilities can do so much. There are people with very severe disabilities that could still do a lot more than people think. And then there are many others who, just with enough training and support ongoing, would be able to do anything that anybody else could do. So one day we'll get beyond all of those. It's a continuous struggle, but as we grow up together more, and we hang out together more, and we see people with disabilities working, then things will start to change.
Thank you for sharing all that information with us, Tony. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
California CEO Magazine and today's community sponsor, the Arc of Riverside County, encourages you to support Arc of California or any of the nonprofits featured in our programs. Your generous contributions go directly toward programs that serve our community. To learn more about Arc of California or the Arc of Riverside County, visit us at arcriverside.org or call at 951-275-5344. For California CEOs Nonprofit Showcase, I'm Robbie Silver, and thank you for listening.